So to those of you who haven't seen the movie yet, there is an after credits scene. It's at the very end, and yeah, it wasn't anything too special. So if you have seen it and you missed it, it's alright. You didn't miss anything. When I was waiting for it, I was like, this better be something good. And it wasn't. It was okay. But what is up, ladies and gents? And Nate here, bringing you my very 2-week late review of X-Men Apocalypse. So X-Men Apocalypse is the third movie of the brand new X-Men First Class lineup with James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. We have First Class, that's the first movie. Then we have Days of Future Past, and then we have X-Men Apocalypse. And I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, and mild spoilers from the movie, and this movie just wasn't as good as Days of Future Past, which kind of breaks my heart. On why? Because Days of Future Past essentially like reset everything, but then like X-Men Apocalypse didn't do anything like that big. Because first off, the movie is supposedly supposed to take a decade after Days of Future Past, but none of the characters have aged at all since it's only been like 2 to 3 years really, and it just really, that one part itself kind of like made my mind be like, really, it's supposed to be 10 years? It only feels like it's been like 2 years, because Days of Future Past came out when I graduated high school, and now I'm seeing it and as I'm going to my 3rd year of college. And another thing is that Apocalypse was really underwhelming. Like, I grew up watching like the X-Men Evolution cartoon, and that one, when they had the Apocalypse arc, it was essentially me being like, oh my god, this Apocalypse guy is like super dope and scary and is actually like a threat. But Apocalypse in the movie was kind of like lustered, which sucks because Oscar Isaac is one hell of an actor, and this was just like kind of like a throwaway role for him. And like having Oscar Isaac is just, and not using him to his full potential is just, I don't know how this Apocalypse came to be. Like, what made Days of Future Past work was that the Sentinels were really scary. Like, the opening scene where we see the Sentinels, like, rushing their surviving X-Men and just, like, ripping them apart, like, stabbing them, and, like, using their own powers against them was what made the Sentinels so scary. And seeing how they start and seeing, like, knowing how they start and knowing what they end up to be as is actually, like, the scary part. But the Apocalypse, there isn't anything to be very scared. We're just told that he's like the first mutant and has really like OP powers, but not really shown what his powers are to an extent. Or essentially his comic powers, where essentially he's always adapting and like evolving to what he needs to in order to be stronger and like counter his opponents. But in this one, it just seems like he can earthbend and just use like materials to grab onto people, and then like apparently he can teleport, and then he can make bubbles and stuff like that. It's just, and apparently he could give everyone power-ups too. It was like, what is all this? And another thing that made the Sentinels stand out from Apocalypse was that the Sentinels were made to stop mutants and essentially like wipe them out, but they go wrong, and then eventually, they take over the world and stuff like that. But then we have Apocalypse, who essentially, he just wants to kind of take over the world and have mutants rule everything but really he just wants to take over the world. And honestly, the only positives I took away from this movie was James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender killing it again as Professor X and Magneto respectively. They just keep up, like, even though like towards the end of the movie I was kind of disappointed on how it kind of ended. Michael Fassbender and again James McAvoy just do a stellar job, and those two just have fantastic chemistry, and I'm excited to what they bring for the next movie, which I kind of don't know where they're going to go with. Maybe they'll show up in the 3rd Wolverine movie, but again, I have no idea when's the next time we're going to see them as Professor X and Magneto. And the other positive I was able to take away from this movie is that it reintroduced classic characters, but just much younger. That being Nightcrawler, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Storm, Psylocke to an extent, and Jubilee too, but Jubilee had no lines. Well, she didn't have any action sequences, and she's barely in the movie, but she's there, so maybe they'll use her. Who knows? Maybe we'll get Kitty Pryde. Maybe we'll get Colossus. I doubt it, but I just realized in order for Deadpool and the X-Men to cross over, the X-Men will have to jump until, like, since the next movie is supposedly set in the 90s, it's gonna take at least another 3 movies, assuming we do one for each decade. And I'm assuming Deadpool is set, or the first Deadpool movie is set in 2016, and the next one is set in whatever year that is in. So it's gonna take a while if they choose to do it that way in order for the X-Men and Deadpool to cross over. And a few more things I just want to touch on real quick is that Mystique, she's shown like a lot. Like she's shown like 85% of all the trailers, and she's the one mostly talking. But in the movie, she wasn't in it as much as I expected it to be. And most of the lines that she has in the trailers are not used to the end, which I was actually surprised by. But again, it was mostly just Jennifer Lawrence with her hair like tied up to the side more than Mystique, because her in her Mystique form, we probably saw it for a good like 15 minutes of like total screen time, and this movie's like 2 hours and like 20 minutes long. And the other thing was that my biggest criticism of the movie was that there's no consequence to everything in this movie. Like there's a few characters that die, one character acknowledges it and it's like, oh, I'm sad, oh, now I have to go fight Apocalypse, and then that ensues. There's no like grave scene afterwards, like towards the end of the movie. But then like there's a bunch of destruction too, and then there's no like consequence to that. It's like, oh, our prayers have been answered, Mr. President, and then stuff like that. It's just like, I want consequence of what happened, but it just seems like, oh yeah, here are the X-Men, let's move on to the next movie. So the next thing I want to talk about is technically a spoiler if you haven't seen the latest or the last trailer for X-Men Apocalypse. So if you haven't seen trailer number 3, I recommend not listening if you don't want it to be spoiled. It's not really a big deal because his cameo, essentially what it was, is very short. And it's not Stan Lee, even though he is in the movie, but it's Wolverine. I just feel like the whole Wolverine thing was just a way for Bryan Singer to use Wolverine again. Be like, his movie's coming out that I'm not directing and he's here, so yeah, enjoy. Because the next movie is rumored to be Old Man Logan, which I guess he kind of looked like an old man in this, but this is set during the 80s, so he's supposed to essentially look younger. And then like the whole Days of Future Past ending with Mystique, you know, being Stryker, and then Wolverine still being caught and being used as Weapon X. It's kind of confusing on what's happening here with Wolverine. It was just like Bryan Singer just wanted a shirtless Hugh Jackman in the movie, so here it was. But yeah, moving on for my grade for X-Men Apocalypse, that being, it's okay, honestly. Like, I'm kind of glad I saw the movie alone rather than wasting money with my family out of town, because that's what I was gonna do. I was like, let's go watch X-Men Apocalypse together. But I'm glad I didn't do that, because this was okay at the most. I think what makes it worse is that there was an FX marathon for all the X-Men movie, and especially like First Class and then Days of Future Past. And then you realize that Magneto's costume changes every movie, and each one looks entirely different from the last. And like, I feel like Bryan Singer wants to get closer to the comics, but then he's like, nah, let's make it totally different. But hey, as long as Michael Fassbender is getting paid appropriately for his role as Magneto, I'm okay with it. But yeah, that's my review for X-Men Apocalypse. Let me know your thoughts if you have seen the movie, which I'm assuming you have, down in the comments below. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed my review. I'll see you guys all next time. And until then, bye-bye.